What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is obviously part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. I've done such directors in the past, so Spike Lee, Spike Jonze, Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, and Christopher Nolan. The list goes on. You guys can check that out on my director playlist down below. But guys, you clicked on this video so you know this time around I'm focusing on David Cronenberg's films and ranking them from worst to best. Keep in mind, if you're new to the channel, this will not include any TV shows, short films, music videos, just specifically feature-length films. And I'm filming this as of June of 2022, so it'll be including 22 of his films, 22 being his worst to 1 being his best, and of course my opinion, and it will include his new film, Crimes of the Future. So guys, all that exposition aside, let's get started. So kicking things off with number 22, we have Fast Company, which is very, very un-Cronenberg-esque. It's not a good movie in the slightest. It definitely sticks out like a sore thumb because it's so dull. I mean, my goodness. Avoid this movie at all costs unless you're a completionist like myself trying to watch all Cronenberg's films. Besides that, just avoid it. Please avoid it. It's not worth your time. And that's why it's my number 22. Next up, my number 21 is Stereo, which is one of his early works. And you can definitely see that there's like some style to it where it's like, you know, it's an early version of what Cronenberg would later be known for. But overall, it's a pretty forgettable movie. Like, I can see why it's hard to find because it's overall just kind of forgettable. That's why it's my number 21. Next up, my number 20, we have, speaking of forgettable, we have M. Butterfly. So M. Butterfly, it's a very odd movie in that it's a romance, which is kind of cool to see that, you know, Cronenberg's trying to flex, you know, trying to do a different genre. And you definitely see some of his trademarks. But overall, it's a movie that's pretty uninteresting. It's a romance that, by and large, I was very much so bored by. It is a film that's pretty good looking, though, but overall, it's a film that just can't really sustain my interest personally. I do know some people defend this movie, and I guess I can kind of see why, but for me, I really wasn't interested in watching this movie, unfortunately. And that is why it's my number 20. Next up, we have number 19, which is Crimes of the Future, 1970. I must preface this because he has 2 Crimes of the Future. But yeah, this is the 1970 one. This is the early one. This is a movie that, again, the concept is there. The ideas are there, but I just feel like they're not really fully fleshed out. And the acting, I remember being kind of so-so. It's not a terrible movie. It's just a movie that's kind of like, it's whatever. And that's why it's my number 19. Next up, my number 18, this is one of his newer ones. This is Maps to the Star, all-star cast, and they're pretty good. But some dodgy CGI, especially towards the end, just uninspired directing, and just a story that's pretty lifeless make it to be a movie that's kind of like, It's one of those movies where it's like, it had potential for sure, but the overall execution just really left a lot to be desired. Not a big fan of this movie in the slightest, but it is a movie that I like a bit better than the other ones I mentioned, and that's why it is my number 18. Next up, my number 17 is Cosmopolis. This is a movie that, Cosmopolis is a movie that I should like. It really should be. It's a movie that has Robert Pattinson, one of my favorite actors working today, but his performance isn't enough to save a movie that just really isn't that engaging. It's a movie that almost feels kind of slice of life-esque, but the overall execution of such just really wasn't that good. This movie you can kind of almost say like, oh, well, it doesn't really feel Cronenberg-esque, but there is a lot of focus on the body and everything, which is Cronenberg's, you know, trademark and everything. But it's a movie that I do appreciate some aspects. Like, again, I do think it's well acted and I do think the concept's there, but I just think the overall execution of certain things left a lot to be desired. But I feel mixed about this movie. I like it a bit more, obviously, the Maps to the Star, but still not quite a movie I can say like, hey. And that's why it is my number 17. Next up, my number 16 is classic Cronenberg work. We have number 16, which is Rabid. This movie, I really like the makeup. I really like the practical effects and the usage of such. It's just a movie that I didn't really care about the characters. So I felt that kind of left a lot to be desired in terms of my engagement. But again, in terms of the filmmaking, I do quite appreciate this a lot. Not a movie that's perfect by any means, but I do think it is worth a one-time watch at the very least. And that is why it's my number 16. Next up, my number 15, also classic Cronenberg. We have Shivers. Shivers, pretty much the same template, I'm going to say. It's very similar in terms of Rabid in that I like the filmmaking. I like the practical effects. I like the makeup. I really like all that stuff that's utilized. But just overall, I wasn't that interested with the characters. It's not that long. which is probably why I liked it a bit better than Rabid. Because although that movie also is very short, I think Shivers just had a little bit more going for it in terms of the technical aspects. But overall, it's a movie I liked a bit more than the previous entry, and that's why it's my number 15. Next up, we have number 14, which is Spider. Spider, this movie was hard to find, and I don't really know why, considering that it's Cronenberg and it's also Ralph Fiennes, and Ralph Fiennes gives a, well, fine performance. It's a movie that I feel like maybe upon rewatch I'll like a bit more, but upon first viewing, I like certain things. I like certain stylistic choices that Cronenberg went with, and I do like the lead performance for sure. But I just felt like watching it, I personally just wasn't interested with certain things that were chosen. I like the location. I like the fact that, Ralph Fiennes does such a good job with such an isolated space. And also, I thought that the little things that he did with the tics of his character was also quite good. But it's just a movie that I was grasping at straws in terms of my interest level, truth be told, with this movie. And, it's a shame because I was quite excited for this movie. And, I like it a bit more. And that's why it's not at number 14. Next up, my number 13 is Crimes of the Future, 2022. This movie I was really looking forward to for 2022. Like, really, really looking forward to. And overall, it's a movie that, just like a lot of these other entries, honestly, it's well acted. It's got good usage of practical effects, great makeup. Howard Shore has a pretty decent score. But overall, just the characters, the story, the pacing, left a lot to be desired. And that's something I will say about a lot of Cronenberg's work. That's kind of how I feel. Especially all these other entries I mentioned, you can kind of see that those are kind of my issues with a lot of his movies. But overall, Crimes of the Future, I did like it a bit more than Spider, which is why it is my number 13. And I will say Crimes of the Future, though, considering how it is an original concept, I would say check it out, but just also know yourself. If you're someone that's not down for weird, well, you're probably not clicking on this video because it's Cronenberg, but just know yourself. Know yourself as a viewer. But yeah, Crimes of the Future 2022, it's my number 13. Next up, my number 12 is The Dead Zone. So The Dead Zone, truth be told, it's based on a Stephen King story, and Christoph Walken's in this. This is a movie that I quite liked. I thought that it was a movie that got better as it went along. Like, it started off where I was kind of like, oh gosh, it's kind of dull. But as it progressed, it got better and better and better. And I would say overall, it's an okay to solid-ish movie. It's got some political kind of like intrigue to it that I thought was quite fascinating. Not a perfect movie by any means, but it is a movie that's definitely worth your time, for sure. And that is why it is my number 12. So yeah, that was my number 12. Next up, my number 11 is The Brood. So The Brood is a rock-solid horror film. It's similar to The Dead Zone in terms of my reaction in that early on The Brood I thought was quite uninteresting, but as it progressed, it got better and better, and by the end, I was sold. This is a rock-solid horror film. It's definitely worth your time, and I do think that the tension and, honestly, the violence on display is quite interesting. Brood, again, might not be for everyone, but for me personally, I think it's rock solid, and that's why it is my number 11. Next up, my number 10 is A Dangerous Method, which, if you watch this movie, I think in terms of how there's a lack of violence, I think you'll say, this is Cronenberg. But if you look at the themes and messages about this movie and the focus on the body, like the human body, I definitely think that a lot of people will be able to see that, yeah, it is a Cronenberg film. I liked this film when I saw it. I saw it, what was it? This point 6 years ago. I liked it. I do want to revisit it, but I do remember quite liking it, thinking that it was a very well-acted film, that the psychology behind everything and the focus on such was really mesmerizing. Not a perfect movie from what I remember, but I did quite like it. And that is why it's my number 10. Next up, my number 9 is, of course, Dead Ringers. So this is a movie I know a lot of people have in their top 5, and I can respect that. I think that this movie was solid. I do want to revisit it for sure, but I do think that I had some issues with it. Wasn't really about the pacing, but it is a film that's very, very well acted. Jeremy Irons in the dual performances, great stuff. Really liked what he did there. I like the atmosphere that's created, the tension, the uniqueness of the premise. There's a lot that this movie has going for it. I just maybe wasn't in the right mindset when I watched it. I don't know. But I don't love it the way a lot of people do. But I still think it's rock solid. And again, maybe I'll check it out down the line. I'm down for it. So that was my number 9. Next up, my number 8 is my number 8 is Crash, 1996. So this is a film. This is a film. I I liked Crash. I liked it. But I also think that's a movie I feel quite conflicted about. And I mean that in the best of ways, because this is one of the reasons why I like films. I like films that really make you question things. It really make you think. And since I've seen this film several weeks ago, I can't get out of my head. I continuously start thinking and playing back certain scenes. I can't get out of my head. And I think it's a movie that I could see myself possibly revisiting, because I do think it has a lot to say, and I think that the approach of it was quite brilliant. Not for everyone, that's for sure, but it is a film that I would definitely say is worth your time. Crash 1996, please watch it. You might not like it, but at least you can say you've seen it, because regardless, it's a conversation starter. No question whatsoever. So yeah, that's why it's my number 8. Next up, my number 7 is Scanners. So this movie, it's got quite the opening scene. And the opening scene, truthfully, I think really elevates this movie, because when you see that scene, you're like, oh my goodness, they did that. It never reaches that high of the opening act. But that being said, consistently, I found myself intrigued by the story, the plotting, the way it was paced. It's a movie that overall is just a rock-solid sci-fi horror film. Definitely worth your time. And again, Cronenberg with this unique concept, I quite enjoyed it. Not for everyone, again, but it is a movie that I would definitely say is worth your time. And that's why it's my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is eXistenZ. This movie, throughout it, I thought it was okay to solid, but then the ending, the last 10 minutes occurred, and I was like, holy cow, this went from just okay-ish to solid to like rock solid, close to good. I want to revisit it. I really do, because even though I saw it several weeks ago, I can't get that ending out of my head. And I think it's a really well-acted film. Jude Law, I've heard some people kind of question his accent and everything, and I guess I can see that, but I think also it was intentional with what they were going for in the context of the movie. But even besides that, I mean, you have some great makeup, great body horror that's on display. And the sci-fi concept in itself is also quite intriguing. I quite like eXistenZ. That's why it's my number 6. Next up, we get to the top 5, the nitty-gritty, if you will. My number 5 is Naked Lunch. I do not own it on Criterion Blu-ray yet, but my one friend did let me borrow his Criterion Blu-ray, and after watching the Criterion Blu-ray, I'll definitely be picking this movie up. This is a really good film. I loved a lot of this. Howard Shore's score, costume design, makeup, Cronenberg's directing. I love the blur of reality and just otherworldliness. Like, you are constantly questioning what's real and what's not while watching this film. And I love it, because I feel like that's what's going to make this movie rewatchable and what's going to make me want to come back to it multiple times. Naked Lunch, very out there movie, but I love it for that. And that's why I want to pick it up on Criterion Blu-ray in the next sale. So, I mean, by the time this video is posting, I'll probably already own it on Criterion Blu-ray, but it's what happens when you film videos, ahead of time. But yeah, Naked Lunch is why it's my number 5. Next up, my number 4 is The Fly. So I'm glad I revisited The Fly, because when I saw this like 4 years ago, I thought it was rock solid, but I didn't like it a lot. But upon rewatch like a month or so ago, I really like this film. This is a film with excellent practical effects. Jeff Goldblum's lead performance is really strong. It's a movie that's very well paced. It utilizes its time to the best of its ability. It's got an interesting romance, and I think the actual story itself is handled really well. The Fly definitely comes highly recommended. I'm hoping this gets a 4K release at some point. Yeah, The Fly is my number 4. Next up, my number 3 is Eastern Promises. So I bought this Blu-ray at the beginning of the pandemic, March of 2020. Actually, no, I think it was May of 2020 when I bought this, a couple of months after the beginning of the pandemic. Because I said to myself, I want to revisit it, and what are the odds of this getting a 4K release? And then, of course, this year it gets announced that this is getting a Kino Lorber 4K, which is out of stock as of the filming of this video in June of 2022. So I am planning to pick this up on 4K. To upgrade, but this is a really good film. This is one of my favorite gangster films. And Cronenberg, again, his obsession with the body, it's on display in this film, even though it's not like, body horror, so to speak. You do see a lot of human flesh, so to speak, and it is a film that's, again, very focused on human flesh. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. But Eastern Promises, great film. Very underrated, in my opinion, these days. But yeah, it's my number 3. Next up, my number 2 is Long Live the Flesh. Number 2 is Videodrome. I absolutely love this film. This is a really, really, really good film. I love it. I'll just say it outright. I love this film. Similar to Naked Lunch, it's a film that blurs the line between reality, like what's real and what's not. And I like that. I think that that's what makes me come back to this film quite a bit. Amazing practical effects and makeup. Like truly some of the best you will ever see. And it's a film that's very, very odd. I love it. That's what I love about Cronenberg. He's not afraid to be odd. And this film definitely is as such. But also one thing I wanted to mention, it's not about the movie itself, but I absolutely love how Criterion did this in terms of the Blu-ray. They did it on the DVD too, but like I love it. Videodrome comes highly recommend. Very underrated, I feel like, these days. Like not many people talk about it, unfortunately. But yeah, Videodrome is my number 2. And honestly, Videodrome, I feel like it could go up to number 1 at any point in time because I love it so much. But my number 1, it's the film that got me to want to actually rank Cronenberg's work 6 years ago. And my number 1 is A History of Violence. So I love this film. It's not body horror the way that like a lot of his work is, but it is a film that's dealing with the human body. And the human body is a huge focus on this, especially in terms of like violence afflicted on it. And I think that Viggo Mortensen does such a great job, which I forgot to mention. He's in Eastern Promises as well, and he does equally a great job in that as well. But this, I just felt like had a little bit more meat to it. It's a film that, similar to a lot of his movies, it's like 90 minutes long, and he knows how to utilize that time very effectively. I especially like the opening scene, the long take, really good stuff. Howard Shore gives one of the best scores I've heard from him. It's a film that just keeps on giving, and I absolutely love showing people it that don't really know what this movie's about because they end up being surprised about halfway into it when it changes into something else. So, overall, History of Violence, I quite liked it. But hey, guys, so that is my ranking of all of David Cronenberg's films, all 22 of them. I really do appreciate you guys watching. I did want to say, I try to talk about the directors afterwards in terms of my ranking list. Sometimes I forget, but this time I wanted to mention Cronenberg in terms of his style. I personally am a Cronenberg fan because I like the fact that even when he's not doing body horror, which is obviously what most people know him for, I like that even though he doesn't always focus on body horror, he does focus a lot on the human body. And I feel like a lot of directors don't really do that, which makes Cronenberg stand out. Even when you're not watching a body horror film of his, you know that you're watching a film by him. Also, kind of helps that he has a Howard Shore score that's usually excellent. Viggo Mortensen's also in his films a lot, and he usually always tries to blur the line between what's real and what's not. And I really like that because I feel like when he does that, it especially is effective in terms of rewatchability value because it makes you want to revisit it and try to pick up on more and more things. I like that quite a bit. And I think that Cronenberg, he's a director that, at this point, with how many director ranking lists I've done, I've come to realize that most directors don't have a clean slate. And even though a decent amount of Cronenberg's films I'm not the biggest fan of, there are also a decent amount that I really, really like. And I think that overall, he's an auteur to reckon with. Like, whenever there's a Cronenberg film that's coming out, I'm definitely going to be there. I don't know if he's going to be making any more after Crimes of the Future, unfortunately. But he's still a director I greatly respect and admire. And, yeah, not my favorite, but still someone I greatly admire and really, really like a lot of his stuff. Yeah, that is my ranking again, guys, for David Cronenberg's films, all 22 of them. Let me know your ranking of his work down below. And thank you so much, guys, for watching. Don't forget the subscription, notification bell, follow me in the Letterboxd, and I will get you guys later.